I've had many people write in asking what are some essential albums I would recommend for your collections, and we're going to go through a few of those here on this episode of Todd's Turntable Talk. Welcome everyone to another episode of Todd's Turntable Talk. And before we get started, like always, I'd like to remind you to please make sure and hit that subscribe button, as well as the bell notification to let you know when a new episode drops each and every time on our channel. So many people have asked me what are some records I would recommend. Now, this isn't my favorite albums. We did that in a previous video. These are albums that I think are essential to the vinyl experience and for music lovers to have in their collection. One, to illustrate how wonderful vinyl sounds, but also they're just amazing records that I think everybody should have. Now, we're not going to stick to a certain genre here. I'm going to try and go a little bit all over the map through my collection of things that I personally own, and hopefully maybe you'll be inspired to check out one of these, if not all of them. So first up, on the classic rock side, this album here is an essential, in my opinion, in many, many ways. And this is Led Zeppelin. This is their fourth album, affectionately called Zeppelin IV, but it's technically just a self-titled record. This has Stairway to Heaven, When the Levee Breaks, Rock and Roll, Black Dog. It really checks all the boxes as far as great Zeppelin stuff. It's a great gateway if you don't have any Zeppelin material, but it's also just a fantastic album on vinyl. So this is one I would highly recommend everybody have in their record collection. Next, this album is a little bit more pop punk. This is an album from Green Day's side project. It's the only album they had for it. The group is called Foxborough Hot Tubs. This album is super fun. Great songs. If you like Green Day, you'll love this album. I actually had a friend that likes this more than they like Green Day. But it is an amazing record, and you can still find it pretty easily at most record stores. This is one I would highly recommend. This was done completely analog. This album is fantastic. Very worth getting. And it's even configured like an old school vinyl. See, they got the stereo thing, and on the back of it, like, it looks like an old school record. It's really great record. Switching to the pop world, another album that I think is an essential that everyone have in their collection regardless of preference is this one right here, Michael Jackson's Thriller. Now, getting this album is super simple, super easy. You can find it literally every record store in the world, whether it's original issues or represses. Finding a first pressing of this is a little trickier. If you are interested in finding a first press, the way you can tell is on the back here it has production credits. And on an original first pressing, it will say produced by Quincy Jones, but it will not say co-produced by Michael Jackson. If it says co-produced by Michael Jackson, that is a second and beyond pressing. It is not an original. So if you find one that just says produced by Quincy Jones, you stumbled upon a rarer copy. But this album is amazing, especially on vinyl. It is the production, the mixing, mastering. It is a great record. Almost every song on here was a hit. It's a fantastic record and one that everybody should own. Next, we're going to go to the world of metal. Now, I'm not super huge into a lot of heavy metal. There are some I really enjoy. Bands like Iron Maiden, Megadeth. I like the old school metal, personally. But one of my favorite groups, and an album that is an essential for every collector and music fan in general, I think, is the Black Album by Metallica. Now, it's not technically called the Black Album, it's just Metallica, but it's been affectionately named the Black Album by fans ever since it came out. But this album, in my opinion, is the best production they've ever had. The mix is phenomenal. The production is great. The songs are amazing. It is a great record. This is not an original press. This is the first repressing that Warner Brothers did a few years ago. I got this back in like 2013, I think it was. But Metallica has just reissued for the anniversary of this a humongous box set with tons of bonus things. Also very cool. But if you don't want to spend that kind of money, you can get a repress of just this album for roughly around $25 at most record stores. Flipping things over to the pop world, another album that I think is an essential and something that most people should own. This album, sonically, is a masterpiece. Songwriting, in my opinion, is a masterpiece. And it's the newest album out of all these albums I'm showing you. And this is Billie Eilish's When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? This album, there's a reason that this thing won pretty much every Grammy it was nominated for. It is incredible. And all recorded and produced in her home, in her childhood home, in her brother's bedroom. So cool, and what a great record. Sonically on vinyl, it's fantastic. It's a quiet record. So on vinyl, it really comes across as far as atmosphere and things like that. And it's a really great listen, but also just a really great album. This album, in my opinion, is one of the greatest albums Bruce Springsteen ever produced. And that album is called Nebraska. This album is just Bruce Springsteen and a 4-track recorder and his acoustic guitar and a harmonica. That's all this album is. And it is a beautiful, beautiful album. And the songs are just so well crafted and completely recorded in analog on vinyl. It just sounds incredible. It's a fairly easy album to get. I'm not sure if they reissued this or not. If they did, it'd probably be pretty awesome to get a 180 gram reissue of this. But if you're going to get a Springsteen album for your collection, this one right here is the #1 album that I would recommend. Next up, this one might be considered fairly predictable, as the Michael Jackson one was. But this album is one that I feel everyone should experience. And that is the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Now, this is not an original pressing, obviously. Finding original pressings of this stuff, good luck. But because there are so many variations of Beatles pressings. There's EMI pressings, there's Capitol Records pressings, there's Apple Records pressings, there's stereo, there's mono. Out of all the different bands and artists that I collect, the Beatles is probably the most challenging to narrow down what versions of things you find. But they reissued the entire Beatles catalog a few years ago. You can even get this giant box set of either mono or stereo reissues. And you can find this one solo remastered very, very easy too. It is a great album. Sonically, it is way ahead of its time. And just an essential album that I think every collector should have in their collection. These last two, I had a hard time narrowing it down between one or the other. And then I realized, why bother? Both of these albums are essentials in my mind. Both amazing concept records in their own ways. And probably the best illustration of this band's work, period. And I'm talking about Pink Floyd. And the albums I'm talking about are Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall. Both these you can get very, very easily. You can get used versions of these, fairly simple, or you can get brand new reissues of either of these. Dark Side is more a soundscape, atmospheric kind of record with amazing layers and what Quincy Jones refers to as ear candy, which is stuff that, you know, the more you listen, the more stuff you notice in the background that you might not have noticed before. So Dark Side of the Moon, if you want an album like that, this album just is incredible for that. It is an amazing record, and especially on vinyl, this is awesome. This is a 180 gram reissue that I have. I did not get the original of this one. I went for the 180 gram. I got this at Hot Topic years ago. I don't even know if they still sell records there. But you can find reissues of this album fairly easy, as well as original versions too. And with The Wall, this is one of my all-time favorite albums anyway. But this to me is the true definition of a concept record. It is a cohesive story all the way through from beginning to end. And the songs are amazing. The production is great. And on vinyl, this album is just incredible. And it's very paced that way. Each side of the vinyl is another act in the story. So essentially it's a 4-act story, and each side is an act, and it's structured an opening and ending to each one. Very, very cool, and definitely something that I think everyone should have. This of mine is an original press that I stumbled across, which original pressings of this are fairly easy to find if you want to look online for them. But reissues of this are very readily available too. It's a little more on the expensive side for the reissue of this for some reason. I still don't understand why. I still see the newer reissues of this in stores for $50, $60, and it's only a double album. Most double albums are $35, $40. But for some reason, the wall is more expensive, and I've never quite figured out why. So if you can find an original press of this, that's what I would go for. Reissues are cool, but $50, $60 for just a double album of something you can get a fairly original press for $15, $20, I'd go for the used one, personally. But either way, another album that is an essential must-have for your collection. So that's my opinion on just some essentials that people should probably have in their collection. I also like to throw an honorable mention out to Paul Simon's Graceland, an album I do not currently have on vinyl that I'm still looking to find a good copy of. That is another album that I think is an essential that everyone should have, and especially on vinyl. It just sounds incredible. So I hope you found this helpful. Hopefully you might go out and check out one of these, if not a couple, if not all of them. And if there's any topics you'd like to hear me discuss on the show, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to try and get to all the topics that you all would love me to talk about. And if there's any albums that you think are essentials that we might not have touched on this episode, please leave them in the comments below. I love having discussions with all of you in the comments. So that's all for today, and we'll see you next time on another episode of Todd's Turntable Talk.